Good afternoon, everybody, and hope everyone's having a great Tuesday afternoon. This is Scott Morganroth here on the South Florida Tribune podcast. Today we talk a little bit of music with Louis Adio Weiss. And Louis, how about that? We get to talk about some artists today, don't we?
Yeah, one of my fortes, one of my favorites things to discuss. It'll be fun. We're doing a little list talking today. That's what we're going to be talking about. So it should be fun.
Yeah, well, when we talk about generation gap, and we definitely have one like 33 years plus with ours, I have a feeling that the artist will vary a little bit. So since you're a baseball guy, why don't you go ahead and lead off with some of yours, and I'll give you my top 10 at the very end. How's that?
So what I'll do is, because I feel like I'm going to have a lot more to say because of my opinions with music run a little deeper, I'll give a list of my honorable mentions first and give a little bit of a brief background as to how my list was constructed. I mean, for me, music is a thing of emotional appeal, so if I listen to a song or an artist that resonates with me emotionally and there's some sort of, I can relate to it in a sense that, a lot of the lyrical themes tend to pair up with a lot of what's going on in my life, that's what will gravitate me towards an artist. And yeah, I mean, I'll preface this by saying that my top 10 list is a mixture of old and new. It's also, we talked about cross-cultural kind of things here. A lot of the artists that, I write down on my list, the ones that I gravitated towards the most in my life are ones that come from generations prior. There's not really many of, the current ilk that appeal to me the way that these artists do, but I'll start off with some honorable mentions, and I'm sure for many of our listeners here, there's going to be a couple of names you guys haven't heard of, but, I'll start off with two names that you probably have heard of. One band that was, and this is an honorable mention, one band that was incremental in, my forming of my musical taste as I got older, maybe around 10, 11, was AC/DC, obviously the Australian hard rock band, blues rock band, a band that I loved. In my first concert when I was 11 years old, or 12 years old in 2008, first show I ever saw down at the BB&T Center in Sunrise. Thought it was a great show. They were promoting Black Ice, one of my favorite bands, but as I got older, my taste kind of evolved, though I still from time to time will put on Back in Black or Highway to Hell, two quintessential blues and hard rock albums from the late 70s and early 1980s. Another band is Yes, the British progressive rock band, of course, with classic records such as Fragile and Close to the Edge and the Yes album. They're one of my favorite progressive rock bands. I also got the chance to see them at concert in 2012. Thought that was a really good show. And the genre progressive rock is something that I'll explore a little bit more as I get into my list. And then three other artists I wanted to put because I wanted to leave the honorable mentions brief, though I could be here all day with those. One that I really love is the Velvet Underground. If you want to go back generations, obviously originating in the mid-1960s in New York, the Velvet Underground, one of the most influential bands of all time, in my opinion, and I feel like if I had space for 12 or 15, they'd be on this list, but combining everything from psychedelic rock to art rock to experimental music to the avant-garde, they're definitely a group I love. I thought Lou Reed's poetry was very poetic. I mean, no pun intended, it was poetic. It was, they explored themes of, transgressive themes and voyeuristic themes not seen in rock music at the time, and that first debut record, obviously the Velvet Underground Nico from 1967, is one of the greatest records of all time. And if you want to go a little hip-hop, as far as my tastes go with hip-hop, my hip-hop tastes are a little bit on the left side. I like a lot of the more experimental stuff, so MF Doom, New York rapper, British born, but he's, most commonly resides in New York, and a lot of his themes reflect obviously the supervillain character Dr. Doom, but I think his very enigmatic personality on the mic. I absolutely love MF Doom. And then the last honorable mention I'll go with is Can, the German krautrock, experimental rock, funk group from the late 60s and early 70s. If you really like experimental music and you like to see the weirder side of where music can go, then definitely listen to records like Tago Mago from 1971 or Egg Bam Yassi or Future Days from 71, 72, and 73. I think those are all perfect records in their own right, but with that said, Scott, I'll let you get to your list. Talk a little bit about the artists that you love, and then I'll get into mine.
All right, well, you're right about one thing. You get into these honorable mentions things, and these will drive you completely nuts. So I was going over a few of them, and I'll associate a couple of songs connected to it. Bette Midler, Wind Beneath My Wings, certainly one of my all-time favorite songs for sure. Survivor, they've got a lot of different great songs there. Eye of the Tiger, The Search Is Over, and then David Soul, who used to play on Starsky and Hutch, Don't Give Up on Us. But for me, REO Speedwagon is one that I've always thought the world of. Can't Fight This Feeling. And the one thing about music for me is knowing that I'm a thinker's thinker. I like to take long drives and meditate regardless of what the gas costs are.
Mm-hmm.
I make some of my most important decisions when I'm on the road, and REO's always been great. Chicago, you can get into the list of how many songs there. And, you wouldn't be able to name every one of them off the top of your head, but that's another group that I take a lot of. Journey is another great group that I really enjoy. Kelly Clarkson. Didn't she come from American Idol, though?
Yeah, she did. Early, I believe season 1. I mean, so there's an exceptional artist in the scheme of music TV shows. So there's one for you.
Yeah. Well, again, you got to be discovered someplace, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Shania Twain.
Yeah, and fun fact, I listed AC/DC, and this is just me being a history buff. Her big records in the late 90s when she was releasing, she would kind of carry the same formula that Michael Jackson did, and it worked because she sold upwards of 30 million records with her late 90s country pop stuff. But her producer was her ex-husband, Robert Mutt Lange. And Robert Mutt Lange, for those of you who don't know, produced AC/DC's Highway to Hell and Back in Black. And for those about to rock, 3 of their biggest records. So a little hard rock country pop connection there going on.
All right, Faith Hill is a lady that I really, really like quite a bit. And I get into 9 million songs, but I'd be repetitious on all counts. So. Mm-hmm. The Carpenters I grew up definitely liking. How do you not like Karen Carpenter?
Yeah.
You ever see that movie, though, the Karen Carpenter story?
I did, yeah. And she always had such a pretty voice. I'll never forget her version of her Christmas song that she did. And very underrated as a drummer, too. Not a lot of people talk about this, but Karen Carpenter was their drummer during the height of their career in the mid-'70s.
Yeah, then you've got Elton John. Talk about a generational type of singer. He'd come up with a million winners. I think Philadelphia Freedom was one of those.
Philadelphia Freedom, Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting, Candle in the Wind.
All right.
You can list. Honky Chateau, his country rock record from the early '70s, is a very underrated record in his catalog. But in the early to mid '70s, he was one of the go-tos, especially, and he was not a lot of people give him enough credit for being a big proponent of the early glam rock scene with obviously Bowie, Ziggy Stardust, and bands like T-Rex. Him and Bernie Taupin had a very good songwriting partnership together. I mean, Bernie wrote the lyrics and Elton put music to it, and that was the beauty of their relationship that still continues to this day. So, I love Elton John. I think that's an amazing pick, and he's apt on anybody's
I've seen
list.
him in concert over at the Palace of Auburn Hills.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I saw REO Speedwagon over at Pine Knob in the Detroit area, and REO is great. I never have enough of him. Mm-hmm. I've invested a lot of money in them when it came to CDs and all these different
big,
ways to listen to
arena rock band from the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah, and then you got Toto was another one. I Won't Hold You Back is one.
Hold the Line, Africa.
Yeah, that one too. So and then Kenny Rogers, on the countryside.
Yeah, The Gambler, right? That's his big song. And
I've seen his Christmas shows. They're really, really, really good. Mm-hmm. Again, I could go sit here and look at a list of them, and I think Firehouse is another one. When I look into your eyes, and folks, when you talk about music, it is exactly what it is. It depends on what you're feeling for at that particular moment. I can't get into some of these real hard-nosed noisemakers. It's just takes away from my ability to relax if I even know how to do it anyways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Kenny Rogers, for those of us who have seen The Big Lebowski, I believe he was in the late 60s. He was in a psychedelic rock band, and I'm blanking on their name, but obviously the late 60s is associated with the counterculture and the hippie movement and the experimentation with psychedelic drugs. And their big hit single that, again, I'm upset that I'm blanking on the name of the band, but the song Just Checked In to See What Condition My Condition Was In. Obviously, that's Kenny Rogers on lead vocals and acoustic guitar in that song. And, not many people know that he was a psych rock artist before he ventured into the realm of country pop. Same thing with Glenn Campbell.
Right.
Glenn Campbell, before he was, Southern Nights and Rhinestone Cowboy and Wichita Lineman, was a studio musician for Phil Spector's Wrecking Crew Orchestra, who worked with the Beach Boys, the Ronettes, so many amazing, vocal groups in the 60s. And yeah, a lot of those artists have stories that transcend obviously their popularity that ensued after. But I assume that's the rest of your list.
Well, yeah, but now I'm going to start rambling off songs.
Go ahead. Yeah, give me some songs.
Greatest American Hero by Joey Scarborough. How do you like that one? That one to me is, I'm always walking on air, a lot of time, walking on edge too. Pearl Harbor by Faith Hill. Kelly Clarkson comes up with a pretty good one. A moment like this, and the list goes on. Let's see what other ones. Of course, how do you forget about Whitney Houston? Obviously, one of the greatest.
One of the most transcendent voices you'll probably ever hear.
Yeah, that's
regardless of genre of music. I mean, everybody knows the Bodyguard soundtrack, right? Kevin Costner and her rendition of "I Will Always Love You."
Yeah, well, that's true, and I think one that Xavier McKnight could probably relate to is Martina McBride, Concrete Angel. We actually did a show on Concrete Angel on the Real and the Rare, and talking about child abuse. And you want to talk about something that definitely goes ahead and hits closer to home. That's definitely. But Concrete Angel by Martina McBride is another powerful one. I think another song that really strikes me, and I associate sometimes songs with locations, but I'll still be loving you where they have the lyrics to all the mountains or valleys, and that associates me with the Phoenix, Arizona area, because there are lots of mountains and valleys. Of course, people in the Las Vegas area might think otherwise, do you know what I mean? But it's, you look at some of those things. David Cook's another guy who has a lot of good songs too. And I think, and I'll just go back to some of the ones that I have with that I do on my YouTube channel with short drives. After All These Years by Jim Brickhouse and Ann Cochran, I think it was. And again, this is a generational thing with you. Coldplay, Viva La Vida is a really good one.
Yeah. So on Coldplay, I'm not the biggest Coldplay fan, but what I do appreciate the fact is that they know how to work with some very talented people. They actually worked with Brian Eno, who co-produced that record. And for my music fans out there whose tastes tend to fall more in line with me, of the more of the experimental side, Brian Eno obviously was a member of Roxy Music, and he produced groups like U2, James, and Travis, and a lot of great British Britpop groups from the late '90s. And obviously the U2 were British alt rock post punk group, but yeah, Brian Eno is one of the more celebrated names in popular music, even though his tastes tend to lie more on the experimental side. But yeah, I do appreciate Chris Martin and co, lead singer of Coldplay, and for working with a guy like Brian Eno, who I feel is immensely talented.
Well, Chaka Khan, Through the Fire is another one, and then Amy Grant puts one out, That's What Love Is For. So, I mean, again, folks, if you haven't figured out the fact that I'm more into the easy-going, easy-listening stuff, then that's exactly what I am. But again, everybody uses music as a way to go out there and figure out what their mood is and how they go about doing things. Sometimes if you need some real hard rock, then you do that when you're up between 12 midnight and 6 in the morning, where you need that noise. If you need something just to relax you while you're driving up the ocean, taking a long meditating drive wherever part of the country that you're in, that's another story. And then you've got another one that I like, that I actually could relate to sports, was Kenny Loggins' This Is It. And that one actually was based on the 1979 NCAA Final Four with Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. And that's when a lot of those...
I believe that song was covered by Huey Lewis and the News on their 1985 Blue-Eyed Soul and pop rock classic Sports, which is a very big record if you're into 80s pastiches and a lot of that stuff. I mean, yeah, Kenny Loggins obviously also wrote Danger Zone, which was this soundtrack song to Top Gun from 1980, Tom Cruise movie from 1986. So everybody knows that song. I mean, do you have any other songs you want to suggest before I get into my list?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Maureen McGovern, There's Got to Be a Morning After is always one. So, I guess the thing that is recurrent with me is I'm definitely, when I mentioned generational gap, I really did with us, which makes it this particular program so interesting because of the fact that I'm closer to your dad's age anyways.
Yeah, your taste, it seems to me, lie a lot in classic Americana and obviously music relative to certain times in your life, which is the beautiful thing about music. People who hear your favorite music don't always necessarily have to like it back, but they can get a taste of who you are as a person solely by what you listen to, which I think is a lot of what goes into my list. And pretty much anybody who's a compulsive list maker and just likes to talk about music or anything that they like in any particular order. I mean, if you're ready, I can get into my list now.
Go ahead. I know you're chomping a bit to do it.
So
I probably spit out more songs than I normally should have anyway.
Yeah, so I'll get into my list. I won't necessarily name... I'll give select songs for each artist that maybe I recommend you guys listen to, and records, and maybe you'll hear me ramble a little bit about their bios and stuff. But so for my top 10, I had a tough time picking a number 10, I was stuck between two artists who really mean a lot to me. One that was very formative, and then another one